Growth often arrives quietly, without ceremony or recognition. It begins as a whisper within you, a subtle sense that something no longer fits, that conversations once engaging now drain your energy, that environments once comfortable now feel suffocating. This is the nature of inner evolution. As you awaken to a deeper understanding of yourself and life, the vibrations that once matched your old identity begin to fade away. The people who once resonated with your struggles and perspectives may not follow you into this new chapter. What once felt like home starts to feel foreign, and you begin to drift into the unfamiliar space between who you were and who you are becoming. This distance that forms between you and others is not something you consciously create. It is not a wall built from ego or pride. It is the natural byproduct of transformation. When you begin to see life through new eyes, your energy shifts, your values evolve, and your priorities realign. You no longer engage in the same conversations, chase the same desires, or participate in the same illusions. Those who remain attached to the older version of you may feel confused, even threatened by your change. They may interpret your silence as withdrawal or your clarity as judgment. But what is truly happening is not separation out of disdain, it is separation born from growth. Yet this is where many people stumble. They mistake distance for superiority. They believe that because they see what others cannot, they are somehow above them. But growth does not elevate you in the hierarchy of consciousness, it deepens your compassion for the whole. Every person you outgrow still carries the same divine essence within them, merely wrapped in layers of unawareness that you too once wore. To look down upon them is to forget your own journey, to forget the countless moments when you too were lost in confusion, clinging to illusions that you now see through. The moment you start believing you are beyond others, you are once again trapped by the very ego that growth sought to dissolve. Real evolution does not create hierarchies, it reveals unity. The distance that emerges between you and others is not meant to divide, but to guide. It invites you to honor your path while respecting theirs. You are not walking away from them in arrogance. You are simply walking toward a higher alignment that their energy does not yet match. Perhaps one day they will walk that same road, and they will remember your silence not as rejection, but as an act of love and authenticity. Growth, then, is a silent recalibration of connection. Some bonds dissolve not out of conflict, but out of completion. You no longer need to fit where you once belonged, and that's not a tragedy. It's a sign that your soul is expanding. The space that opens up between you and others is not emptiness. It is the sacred room required for your next evolution to unfold. When awakening begins to take root within you, the noise of the world starts to fade into the background. You begin to crave silence, not as an escape, but as a return to something real, something that words and noise can no longer express. The more you understand yourself, the less you feel the need to explain. The more you awaken, the less you feel the desire to convince. And in that stillness, a new kind of loneliness can appear. Not because you are alone, but because few can meet you in that quiet space of awareness. The conversations that once felt stimulating now seem hollow. The constant need for validation and attention that once drove you begins to dissolve, and you realize how much of the world revolves around the fear of being unseen. You start to see that most people talk not to communicate, but to fill the silence that terrifies them. They seek constant engagement, constant distraction, because silence reveals too much. It shows them the unease they carry inside, the emptiness they've spent years trying to hide beneath noise, routine, and pretense. But for you, silence becomes a companion. It becomes the teacher that speaks in pauses, in breath, in the subtle awareness that everything is already complete. You no longer seek the approval of others to feel whole, because the source of that wholeness has turned inward. You begin to understand that no one can validate the infinite, and what you are discovering within yourself is beyond the reach of human praise. This is where misunderstanding begins. Those around you may sense your change, but not understand its nature. They may interpret your silence as distance, your calmness as detachment, your lack of drama as indifference. They might say you've changed, and they would be right, but not in the way they think. You haven't withdrawn from life, you've entered it more fully. You haven't become emotionless, you've stopped performing emotions that were never yours. You haven't lost interest in people, you've simply stopped participating in the illusions that keep them asleep. And yet, this understanding can be painful. You want to share what you've discovered, but language fails. You want others to feel the peace you found, but you realize that peace cannot be given. It must be discovered. So you remain quiet, and in that quiet, the world calls you distant. But in truth, you are more connected than ever, just in a way that transcends conversation and agreement. To awaken is to become the still lake that reflects everything without clinging to any of it. And while others splash about trying to shape the water, you rest in the awareness that there is nothing to control. This silence, misunderstood as emptiness, is the very fullness of life itself. And though few may understand it, it is here that you finally find peace, not in being seen, but in seeing clearly. As the path of growth unfolds, it often brings with it a subtle but powerful temptation, the temptation of feeling superior. When you begin to awaken to truths that others do not yet perceive, when you start to see through illusions that still bind them, a quiet pride can take root in the heart. It disguises itself as enlightenment, but in truth, it is the ego re-emerging in more sophisticated form. You start to believe that, because you have stepped beyond the patterns of fear, control, or attachment that once held you, you are somehow above those who still dwell within them. Yet this is the most dangerous illusion of all, for it turns awakening into another identity, another mask of separateness. And the moment you feel separate, you have fallen asleep again. True awakening dissolves the boundaries between you and others. It does not place you on a pedestal, it brings you to your knees in humility. You begin to see that everyone, regardless of their awareness, is playing a sacred role in the unfolding of existence. The one who sleeps and the one who awakens are both expressions of the same consciousness, exploring itself in different forms. To look down upon someone for not seeing is to forget that you too once lived in that same fog. Every insight you now possess came through experience, through mistakes, through pain, and those still asleep are simply walking through their own necessary lessons. The ego loves to claim awakening as an achievement. It says, "Look how aware I've become, how detached, how spiritual." But consciousness is not something you earn. It is something you remember. It has always been there, beneath layers of illusion. And when you remember, you do not become more. You simply become real. The light of awareness does not make you better. It makes you transparent. The more you awaken, the less there is of you to defend, to compare, to measure. Superiority belongs to the self that thinks it is separate. And when that self dissolves, so does the need to stand above anyone else. The true mark of inner growth is gentleness. It is the quiet understanding that everyone is doing the best they can with the awareness they have. It is the ability to meet others where they are without judgment, to offer compassion instead of correction, presence instead of persuasion. When you reach this place, you no longer seek to pull others forward, you simply embody the peace that naturally invites them to rise. You realize that no one can be hurried on their path. Each awakening blooms in its own divine timing. So the danger of arrogance is not merely moral, it is spiritual. It blinds you to the unity that awakening reveals. When you see yourself as separate, even in your awareness, you are still trapped within the dream. But when you can look upon the world and see no higher or lower, no enlightened or unenlightened, only life expressing itself in infinite stages of becoming, then you have truly begun to awaken. Letting go is one of the most misunderstood aspects of growth. People often imagine it as abandonment, as if releasing someone or something means rejecting them. But in truth, letting go is not about loss. It is about alignment. It is the process of clearing the old energy that no longer resonates with the frequency of your becoming. As you evolve, your soul begins to move at a different rhythm, and what once felt familiar now feels heavy. The conversations that once sparked your curiosity now seem to echo with repetition. The relationships that once gave comfort now drain your energy. It is not because they are wrong or broken, but because you are no longer vibrating in the same field. Growth requires space, and that space often comes through release. There is a kind of sacred emptiness that follows when you stop forcing connections that no longer serve your evolution. This emptiness is not a punishment. It is preparation. The universe cannot fill a cup that is already overflowing with outdated attachments. To make room for the new, the old must be allowed to dissolve naturally. The pain you feel during this process is simply the resistance to change. It is the mind clinging to the known, even when the known has already begun to suffocate the spirit. Letting go does not mean you stop caring. In fact, it often comes from a place of deep love, love for yourself, for your peace, and even for the people you release. Because when you continue holding on to relationships or situations that no longer align, you deny everyone involved the opportunity to grow into their next stage of being. You keep yourself anchored to an old version of reality, and in doing so, you block the flow of life. Every ending is a quiet invitation for renewal, but it requires the courage to trust what you cannot yet see. There is a strange relief that comes when you finally surrender to this truth. You begin to see that nothing truly belongs to you. Not people, not experiences, not even identities. Everything you encounter is borrowed from the infinite, meant to be cherished and then released. The friendships that fade, the opportunities that slip away, the dreams that no longer call to you, all of these are part of a greater orchestration guiding you toward alignment. When you let go with grace, you move with the current of life instead of against it. And so, letting go becomes not an act of defeat, but an act of trust. It is saying yes to the unfolding of your journey, even when you cannot predict where it will lead. It is choosing peace over attachment, truth over comfort, evolution over stagnation. Each time you release something that no longer resonates, you step closer to the authentic expression of your being. What feels like loss at first is often the space through which something far greater can finally enter. As you grow, it's easy to confuse solitude with separation. You begin to walk alone more often, not because you despise company, but because the company you once kept no longer reflects who you are becoming. There is a tenderness in this loneliness, a quiet ache that whispers that growth sometimes means saying goodbye without resentment. Yet the true purpose of awakening is not to isolate yourself from the world. It is to love it more deeply, to see yourself in everything and everyone, even when your paths diverge. The danger lies in mistaking your clarity for distance, when in truth, awareness was meant to bring you closer to the essence of all things. When you begin to awaken, your vision changes. You no longer see people as obstacles, competitors, or strangers. You see them as mirrors, each reflecting a piece of the same consciousness you are made of. The anger of one person, the confusion of another, the ignorance of many, all become expressions of the same divine energy learning about itself. This recognition dissolves judgment and invites compassion. You stop needing others to understand you, because you understand them. You no longer seek agreement, because your peace no longer depends on it. You begin to love quietly, without the need to be loved back in the same way. Growth at its highest level is not about transcending humanity, it is about embracing it. You realize that everyone, even those still lost in fear and illusion, are exactly where they are meant to be. Their pain, their resistance, their blindness, all of it serves the same unfolding that your awakening does. When you see life this way, you no longer try to change people, you simply embody what they have forgotten. Your presence becomes the teaching. Your stillness becomes the message. You no longer need to preach light. You are the light shining not to prove anything, but simply because shining is your nature. And though your path may lead you away from familiar faces, you begin to understand that true connection is not built on proximity. It is built on energy. Even when you walk alone, you are not truly apart from anyone, because the same consciousness that breathes through you breathes through them. Every soul is part of the same vast ocean of being, each wave rising and falling in its own rhythm. You may be at a different point in that rhythm, but the water is the same. This understanding transforms your loneliness into peace. You stop longing for people to meet you where you are and start meeting them where they are, with patience, empathy, and respect for their journey. Compassion becomes the bridge that connects your expanded awareness to the world that still sleeps. You love without possession, you guide without control, and you serve without ego. This is the quiet beauty of awakened growth, realizing that even as you walk ahead, you are never apart. You are simply walking as love itself, illuminating the path for those who will one day remember who they truly are.